No, well, I mean, the thing for the future, that just one of the things I'm worried about. I mean, yeah, I mean, a whole lot. These guys are just the tip of the iceberg,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense. There's many, many more guys out there who are simpatico, but, can't quite bring themselves or can't afford the bus fare or whatever to get to a march like this. I mean,
Right.
obviously, it's going to be selective to an extent, but there's lots of guys who've been socialized into these beliefs and the slightly softer sort of version of the alt-right, the kind of Mike Cernovich, Alex Jones, Milo
Yeah.
Yiannopoulos kind of version. And they are the guys who are going to be putting themselves forward as Republican congressmen in 10 or 15 years. I
Right.
mean, there's no other. It's hard for me to see how that doesn't happen. And thousands of young men are being socialized into a particular version of right-wing doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty hardcore.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, that's so. Let's. I mean, can you kind of compare or maybe trace your own personal, I don't know, like how this has affected you from how you kind of viewed it from back in the Oregon standoff, which was a little over a year and a half ago, to today? Like, how have your own emotions kind of changed towards this movement? It sounds like you take it a lot more seriously now.
I think so. I mean, yeah, I was pretty alarmed by what I saw last week. I mean, I'm not easily rattled, I don't
Right.
think, and I've been to a lot of events like this now. Um, yeah, and look, the Oregon guys were made that community's life hell, and they were threatening people, and or their militia offsiders were threatening people and making the life of the town hell. But I have to say, they almost seem comedic in retrospect,
Mm-hmm.
beside what I saw last week. I've seen a lot of violence here in Portland over the last few months.
Yes.
There was a double murder here.
Right.
A guy was hurling racial epithets on a train. Three men got up to remonstrate with him and intervene. He stabbed all three of them, and two of them died. And a week after that, a local group by the name of Patriot Prayer, to which one of their rallies this guy had been to, held, I think at that stage it was their sixth rally of the year, and they've had three more since then, I believe. And that was a big day. I mean, that was a big day for the alt-right, and they had 400 or 500 people, maybe 300 or 400 people, and they were surrounded by thousands of Portlanders. I think it was a 10-to-1 ratio. But they've had rallies since then where they've had a much smaller group of counter-protesters, and a lot of those rallies have kind of devolved into brawling.
Mm-hmm.
But it's much less organised brawling. It's scary. I don't know. The Portland police have started taking a hands-off approach to this stuff, and that just leads to running brawls, and that's not good. And there's more and more pepper spray turning up at those things too. But I have never felt myself respond in the way that I did, to that torch rally and to these massed ranks of people going through the streets of a town. I mean, I just think we're getting to the point now where these guys have worked out ways to shut a city down, to go after the people who they consider to be their existential enemies on the left, to mold young men into a kind of street fighting force, at least, into a kind of organized street fighting force. And, like the day after on the Sunday, there was supposed to be a memorial vigil for the woman, Heather Heyer, who was killed. And, they had to call that off because they had gotten threats. I mean, and that's by way of saying they terrorized this college town of, I don't know what it is, 45,000 people for a whole weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Their tactics have evolved. It must have cost millions of dollars to police that event, especially given there were 2 other deaths on that day. 2 state troopers died in a helicopter crash. Right. And they were involved in the policing of the event.
Right. So I think also it's important for listeners to understand when you hear numbers like 200, 300, 1,000, 1,500, it may not sound as significant as it really is, but that really is significant. I mean, first of all, I just seem to remember, like, if Nazis had one of their Skokie marches or whatever, and or the kid, there would be like 20, 30 people in uniforms. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. That's how I seem to remember it. Certainly not hundreds of young people.
That's how I remember it. And they would be really pathetic, messed up people.
Yeah.
And it sounds like they've recruited a more formidable demographic.
When you're organized and you're ideologically organized and prepared, it sounds like they are, and you have even a few hundred people, let alone, 1,000 or 1,500. I mean, John, you've said even, I hate to even bring the IRA's name in here, but as you've said at any one times, at sort of in the 90s when the IRA was fighting the British government, they didn't have more than a few hundred active members. Now, granted, it's a very different deal, but still,
you don't want more than a few hundred armed members, because everybody who's actually involved in an armed insurgency is a risk as a potential informer.
Right.
So you want. There's no point.
Right.
I mean, at the moment we're dealing with stylized public violence, which is a whole different thing, which the IRA also engaged in at various other points. But the scary thing to me about 1,000 people like this is that the preventative against that was and still is in the minds of a lot of people out there, that once you do that, you've crossed a line.
Yeah, you're over forever.
You're going to be unemployable. You're a pariah.
Yeah.
You're a Nazi. And just calling someone that, a Nazi, used to be the end of the discussion. You were out of mainstream life forever. So as you were saying, Jason, if there are 1,000 not completely wacko-seeming young males willing to do that, there are many more thousands who are holding back because they have a job interview or because they want to belong to some social group, but they're still going online and serving in secret. And the minute it gets a little safer, they'll join up.
Right.
The other thing to say is, you guys, I guess you guys were here in the 90s, right? Or were you here for the militia movement, from the early mid-90s? Those guys mostly were operating, they're in, the image you have in your mind is of them in compounds, right?
Yeah.
And very, very apocalyptic beliefs, kind of not a mainstream kind of part of society.
Very rural, very rural.
Yeah. Caches of weapons out in Montana somewhere, or, the backwoods of Michigan. Sure, that whole movement terminated with someone blowing up a federal building in Oklahoma City, right? I mean, it was always kind of dangerous, but they weren't coming into college towns, and they've been coming into Portland too. They can't open carry here, but they've been coming in and assisting or whatever with security, as they would put it, and they've really worked hard on mainstreaming their position as well. I mean, I think that's the Oath Keepers' whole thing is they make people swear an oath to the Constitution. They're not as open in their anti-government statements or beliefs. And the laws have changed. More states allow open carry now. You can tote a gun in more places. The assault weapons ban expired in 2004, and I don't imagine it will ever be renewed. There was a Supreme Court judgment in 2009 that firmly defined the right to bear arms as an individual right. And a lot of these guys are veterans.
In line with what you're saying, Jason, somebody posted a photo on the Gary Brecher Facebook page. This guy had taken part in a left-wing counter demonstration in Houston, Texas, and said it was like a weird Cold War reenactment because the photo showed a bunch of men carrying AKs and wearing hammer and sickle shirts. And he said the other side was wearing various right-wing shirts and carrying AR-15s. So it was almost as if, your choice of semi-automatic rifle was part of the way you identified the side you were on. And he said they actually had this standoff in Houston, Texas, like their side with their AKs, the other side with their AR-15s, both yelling at each other. Because, of course, Texas, as far as I know, it's compulsory to carry a semi-automatic rifle, not just legal in Texas. So there's no problem with open carry. And if those... because I keep coming back to the firearms, that's how real violence happens in America. And the more standoffs like that you get, the more quickly it goes from some sort of grotesque and inevitably comic-seeming thing to real carnage. Yeah,
and I mean, the country now, is awash in AR-15s. I mean, we got no sales tax in Oregon, so I think I could probably walk into a shop right now and get one for $600-700. They'll do a background check. It'll take 10 minutes. It's not hard to get them, and the industry really pushes them and markets them hard. Even they even tell people you can take it hunting. I mean, I don't know what would be left of a deer after you sprayed it with an AR-15, but they're kind of marketed as leisure stuff now, and that's obviously not what these guys are getting them for. But there are automatic weapons everywhere, and I think, as you say, there are more and more people on the left, on the radical left, who are taking seriously the idea that maybe we should have these things too. And yeah, that does. And there's a debate to be had about that. I'm not saying, I'm not coming down one way or the other on that idea, but it does set up confrontations, as you say. And
by the way, there's another element to this too, which is states. I think this began because of the Dakota Access Pipeline protests. I think it started in North Dakota, but it spread to many states. Laws that indemnify or protect drivers that plow into protesters.
Right.
Yeah. They're passing all across the country, so that you can't be at least civilly liable. So you'd have to prove criminal intent, which would be a lot harder.
That's a good point. Maybe that is one reason to, as it were, choose a vehicle rather than a rifle as your weapon.
Yeah. And I'm not a civility guy. I think politics is a life and death matter. And I don't think the rules of politesse but there's a kind of basic civility that's disappeared, where you don't walk into the middle of a protest with a semi-automatic weapon, right? That's kind of gone now in a lot of places. And you have groups on the left like Redneck Revolt and the John Brown Gun Club who are also arming themselves, and there were people in the counter protests who were open carrying. I saw a couple of sidearms anyway. And I think that's still a matter of huge debate on the left, the wisdom of that. But it's happening, and there are organized groups.
I mean, the next move then is the American security services. Whose side do they take? And then obviously the money would be on taking the right-wing side. I'm not sure of that. But one thing we've seen recently and we've talked about in many shows in many different contexts, is the fact that the American security state is clearly no longer a unified entity. And it really helps to talk about America the way we would talk about any other state, which is not always easy for American commentators. And if you look at America as we would at another state, it's clear there are many demographics that are ready for a war with each other. The state is divided by agency and by hierarchy. We talked to a former Special Forces guy, Jack Murphy, who talked about how there was a sort of officers' revolt from the middle ranks in Syria when asked to train groups that were pretty obviously jihadi and sectarian, and they were just refusing to do that. it's pretty obvious that some security agencies in this country, known as the U.S., are anti-Trump, and other security agencies are very pro-Trump, and that played out in some weird ways during the election. I mean, when you squint at this country we're discussing as if it were foreign, and to me it is increasingly foreign, it's clear that some pretty organized violence will happen, and the question will be which agencies take which side with which level of intensity.
Mm-hmm.
So one of my other hats is I do a weekly kind of media criticism column for The Guardian on right-wing media, what they're saying, what they're talking about. And they've been, and it's not just Alex Jones, it's not just the fringy kind of guys. I mean, conservative media have been talking about this situation in terms of civil war all year, and trying to turn Antifa into this kind of folk devil. And, just really, I don't know if you saw that NRA ad that kind of went viral.
We're coming for you.
Right. It's just like, they are stopping us they are infringing on our liberties. They have Hollywood on their side. They have the media on their side, and we've got our guns, basically. I am the NRA, like, that discourse is absolutely, right-wing media is absolutely drenched in that discourse and has been all year. And you don't want to be alarmist. You don't want to kind of talk things up. You don't want to present things as worse than they are. But that is the way people are talking right now, especially on the right, And look, I think the fact that a whole lot of Californian boys and people from other parts of the country that have nothing to do with the South rallied around a statue of General Robert E. Lee, they're rallying around a symbol, something to them is not a symbol of the South, it's a symbol of whiteness.
Mm-hmm.